And now the last story I want to talk to you about today is that there are no points awarded for difficulty. And true to my style here, the story has nothing to do with investing as well. This is a story about the war on cancer. The war on cancer really picked up in earnest in the United States in the early 1970s. And if you go back to this period in the early 1970s, there was a big burst of scientific optimism. We had just landed on the moon. We had made huge strides in wiping out polio in the United States. There's just a general sense that if scientists put their heads together, they can solve any scientific problem, no matter how hairy and big it looks. So in the early 1970s, we came together and said, it's time to cure cancer, to wipe out cancer like we had just wiped out polio in the United States. The National Cancer Act was signed in 1972, which began a big surge of scientific funding for cancer treatments and cancer research. And this is what has happened next. These are the 5-year age-adjusted cancer survival rates for various cancers. And you can see that most of them are up, and they're up by a lot. So the war on cancer has been very successful at saving and extending tens of millions of lives. But a few years ago, the director of the National Cancer Institute, his name is Harold Varmus, gave a speech at the annual meeting of the National Cancer Institute. And he said, look, despite this progress that the cancer community should be so thrilled about and proud of, we need to come to terms with an inconvenient truth, which is that we have not been able to wipe out cancer and cure cancer like we once thought possible. Like we once imagined that we were going to do when we started the war on cancer. We have not been able to do that. And we might not ever be able to cure cancer like we once thought possible. It's turned out to be a much more difficult and complex illness than we ever imagined. And Harold Varmus said, look, if you accept that truth, then what the cancer community needs to do is to open up a new front in the war on cancer, which is prevention. Because we know that in the United States, roughly half of all cancers can be directly tied to lifestyle, particularly diet, exercise, and smoking. So he said, look, if you want these numbers to go up even more and make a bigger impact on the war on cancer, we need to make prevention the number one front in the war on cancer. And what has happened since is very interesting over the last 10 years, which is that despite knowing how important cancer prevention is to the war on cancer, it's very difficult to get a lot of doctors interested in cancer prevention relative to their interest in cancer treatments. It's very difficult to raise money for cancer prevention relative to what you can raise for cancer treatments. It's very difficult to get politicians and regulators interested in cancer prevention relative to their interest in cancer treatments. Now, a few years ago, one of the top cancer researchers in the world, his name was Robert Weinberg from MIT, was giving a speech, and he made a comment about why this is, about why cancer prevention is so difficult to take seriously, even if we know it's so important in this war on cancer. And what Robert Weinberg said was this, quote, if you don't get cancer, you are not going to die from it. That is a simple truth that we overlook because it is intellectually not very stimulating. He went on to say, quote, getting someone to quit smoking is a behavioral exercise. It has nothing to do with cells and molecules. So people like me are essentially uninterested in it, in spite of the fact that getting someone to quit smoking will have vastly greater impact on cancer mortality than anything I can hope to achieve in my own lifetime. So this is interesting, right? You have one of the top cancer researchers in the world, and he's saying, I can make a bigger difference doing something else, but it's not exciting for him. It's not intellectually stimulating for him. And of course, we don't want people like Robert Weinberg becoming smoking cessation counselors. He is a molecular biologist. He adds a lot of value in his own way. But there's this irony in the war on cancer, which is that things that are very simple, very basic, very boring, but knowingly effective are discounted, and they're not taken as seriously as other things that are complex and exciting, but knowingly less effective. And I think that fundamental irony also exists in investing. You know, we know how to do well in the stock market over a long period of time. It's not very difficult. All you need to do is spend less money than you make, save the difference, buy a diverse low-cost portfolio, and be patient. That's effectively 90% of what you need to know to do well at investing over a long period of time. But do you think this is how investing is taught in schools at the academic level? I still have a finance textbook left over from college, and there is a chapter in there called the Assessment of Confidence Limits of Selected Values of Complex Valued Models. And that formula is in there. No idea what it means. But look, the left side of this chart is like the diet and exercise side of investing. It's so boring, it's so basic, but it works. It makes a difference. This is what moves the needle. The right side of this chart is like the stem cell therapy side of investing. It's not that it's bad. A lot of it is great. We should be thankful that we have it. But we know it's less effective than the simple stuff that makes a difference. And again, as I said earlier, something like this is most relevant to a group like this that does have a lot of financial sophistication, a lot of intelligence and education. That tends to be the group that is most likely to ignore the simple stuff that works and makes a difference in favor of the complicated stuff that it's not that it's bad, but it's less important than the simple stuff that we tend to sweep under the rug. Let me show you what I mean. One example of this. This is Warren Buffett's office in Omaha, Nebraska. He's office at this desk in this chair for about 60 years. So this is the office where he became the world's greatest investor. And I just want you to notice how simple and basic it is. There's no computer, there's no TV, there's no ticker tapes, there's no analyst shouting in his ears. It's just a desk and some where he can read about companies and buy the good ones that he wants. Simple and basic as it possibly can get. This I want to show you. This is the prop trading desk at Lehman Brothers right before they went bankrupt in 2008. You can see this guy has 8 monitors in front of him. He knows what he's looking at, but poor guy next to him only has 4 monitors, so he's probably completely oblivious in the world. But look, if you are a young person leaving college and you're a smart person, you're looking for an exciting career in finance, what looks more intellectually stimulating to you, this or this? Or if you are a hedge fund manager and you're trying to show your clients that you are smart and you're earning your fee, do you want your clients to see this office or this office? It's obvious where the intellectual attention goes to in this industry. But the irony, of course, is that these people went bankrupt, and this is the world's greatest investor by far. And speaking of someone like Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, there was a 20-year period when the average private equity fund returned about 14% per year, and Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, returned about 19% per year. So this outperformance of about 5 annual percentage points over what I think is its most relevant benchmark is what has made Warren Buffett, in annual percentage terms, the greatest investor of all time. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there are 1,000 books on Amazon that try to explain how this happened. Where did this outperformance come from? How did he do it? And they go into grand detail about market cycles and business models, how Buffett thinks about valuation and so on. But here's a simple point that I want you to keep in mind. The average private equity fund is charging 2 and 20 as fees. It's a simple kind of industry standard fee structure, 2% of assets, 20% of profits. Virtually every private equity fund will do this. That's the fee structure. Berkshire Hathaway charges no fees whatsoever. There's no fees. Warren Buffett's total compensation is $100,000 per year. It's been like that forever. There's no other fees associated with it. Just that one fact alone, just the fact that the average private equity fund is charging 2 and 20, while Berkshire charges nothing, just that fact alone accounts for 4 percentage points of the outperformance. How many of those 2,000 books trying to obtain Buffett's outperformance do you think mention this? I've never seen it mentioned anywhere once. And I think the reason it's not mentioned is because the idea that a lot of Buffett's outperformance can be explained by something like fees is too simple for people to take seriously. People don't want to believe that something so extraordinary can take place and be caused by something so incredibly simple. But Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, was once asked by a journalist in kind of a way. The journalist said, if Berkshire Hathaway's strategy is simple, why haven't more people been able to copy it? Why haven't more people emulated it? And Munger said, quote, more investors don't copy our model because our model is too simple. Most people believe you cannot be an expert if it is too simple. He went on to say, quote, how did Berkshire's record happen? If you were an observer, you would see that Warren did most of it by sitting on his ass and just as simple and as basic as it can possibly get. One other example of this that I think is so extraordinary is a guy named Harry Markowitz, who won the Nobel Prize in the early 1990s for his work on the capital asset pricing model, which is a very mathematically complex set of formulas that will tell you exactly how much of your assets should be in stocks or bonds based on how much risk you want to take. Mathematically complex, he won the Nobel Prize for this. A few years ago, someone asked Markowitz how he invests his own money. And he said, quote, I visualize if the stock market went way up and I wasn't in it, or if it went down and I was completely in it. So I split my contributions 50-50 between stocks and bonds. So this is the guy who won the Nobel Prize for these very complicated set of formulas, and he doesn't even use them in investing. And I think what that shows is that what works in investing is really simple rules of thumb based off of your own psychology. Complicated stuff, it's not that it's bad, but its main purpose is to exist because it is stimulating to very smart academics. And so I think one takeaway from this is that I think the best investing advice that you can take for yourself or to give to someone else is to take a simple idea and take it seriously. We need to be reminded that the goal of investing is not to minimize boredom. It is to maximize returns. And most importantly, that no investment recommendation is worth the paper it is written on if you cannot stick with it or if you are likely to abandon it out of confusion. Stick around as an investor and have endurance for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And of course, we all do to the extent that we can. You need to understand why you are investing and what you're investing in the simplest terms possible.